Bienvenue dans Reviewing Africa from What If to What Now, l'émission digitale en direct qui donne la parole aux expertes et experts africains sur des questions d'actualité faisant la une des journaux à travers le continent. Cette semaine, nous parlerons d'éducation et de remise de la dette africaine.
Yes, indeed. Myself and Marie will be talking to African experts every week to get their take on the news stories shaping the political, economic, and social climate in Africa. Now, this week, the focus is on education, which Marie will be doing in French, and debt forgiveness, which I will be discussing in English. We'll also be looking at some lighter content, which has been taking up space on our various social media timelines for some comic relief from the heavy news cycles we are experiencing at the moment.
Exactement, Ouzo. Nous parlerons avec sérieux d'éducation et d'endettement et nous pensons aussi qu'en cette période, nous avons bien besoin de déconfiner nos inquiétudes légitimes. Ce sera la minute COSI 19 avec Ouzo qui nous partagera un contenu beaucoup plus pétillant. Mais pour le moment, donnons la parole à nos experts. Pour parler d'éducation aujourd'hui et trouver des solutions concrètes pour demain, nous avons invité Madame Laura Cacon, directrice marketing de Honoris United Universities, premier réseau panafricain d'enseignement privé supérieur, détenu par le fonds d'investissement anglais Actis. Bienvenue Laura.
Bonjour Marie-Alix et bonjour à tous les auditeurs.
And so that means that I will be speaking to Stephen Ringley, who is the Director of the Regional Integration, Infrastructure and Trade Division at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And I'll be interviewing Stephen on the topic of debt forgiveness. Welcome to Reviewing Africa, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Uzo.
Thank you, Steven. Laura, le Covid-19 donne au système éducatif du monde entier l'occasion de se réinventer, notamment grâce au numérique. Pouvez-vous faire un rapide panorama de la situation sur le continent aujourd'hui?
Avec plaisir, Marie-Alix. Donc aujourd'hui, au niveau du monde entier, comme vous le savez, on a plus d'1,5 milliard d'étudiants et d'écoliers et de bacheliers qui sont aujourd'hui scotchés chez eux à la maison, ce qui représente environ 80% de la population estudiantine mondiale. Et sur notre continent, nous avons près de 350 millions d'étudiants qui sont aujourd'hui à la maison. Donc, sur les 54 pays africains, on a aujourd'hui la quasi-totalité qui ont dû fermer leurs établissements. Donc, la question s'est posée, comment assurer la continuité des études et surtout comment prendre soin de nos professeurs, de notre staff et d'assurer cette continuité parce que l'éducation, plus que jamais, est fondamentale pour notre continent. Donc, pour notre part, au niveau du réseau Honoris, sur les 10 pays que nous avons et les 10 pays sur lesquels nos institutions sont présentes, ce qui représente une soixantaine de campus, nous avons dû switcher au distance learning et à l'enseignement en ligne en quelques semaines pour que nos 45 000 étudiants puissent continuer à étudier. Et là, évidemment, tous les outils à disposition, tous les outils digitaux à disposition ont été utilisés, soit dans des structures qui avaient déjà mis en place des systèmes informatiques, des learning management systems par exemple, ou alors utiliser les outils à disposition pour pouvoir trouver des solutions immédiates. Et je dois dire que ça a été l'effort collectif, la solidarité, l'intelligence collective entre les différentes équipes, que ce soit les professeurs, les IT managers, les responsables de toutes ces entités a été remarquable. Et d'ailleurs, je prends cette opportunité pour les remercier. D'autre part, l'effort des étudiants et l'effort des professeurs pour pouvoir s'adapter à ce nouveau mode est également remarquable. Parce que du jour au lendemain, passer d'un enseignement en face-to-face, par exemple, à un enseignement à distance, implique d'avoir une autre manière de fonctionner, justement d'organiser son emploi du temps, une manière d'interagir, et ce n'est pas toujours évident. Ce n'est pas toujours évident pour plusieurs raisons, Marie-Alix. Pour des raisons qui peuvent être des raisons de connectivité sur notre continent, de data, tout simplement, qui est inégale, d'électricité, tout simplement. Et j'avais nous faisons un point toutes les semaines avec l'ensemble de nos institutions pour suivre pas à pas les évolutions. Et le retour d'expérience, et l'un de nos deans nous parlait d'électricité épileptique dans certains pays. Donc, la réalité est là. C'est oui, un effort considérable pour switcher sur du distance learning ou du online, mais à côté de ça, des challenges qui sont les challenges de la connectivité, les challenges de la data, même si nous avons travaillé avec certains opérateurs qui ont mis à contribution, justement, qui ont contribué à l'effort pour pouvoir déployer des solutions. Mais je dois dire que ça soulève la question également de l'équité. Et Dieu sait si dans l'éducation, c'est quelque chose de fondamental.
Tout à fait. Ça illustre vraiment parfaitement les défis actuels auxquels beaucoup de personnes font face, mais dont on parle peu. Parlant de défis, on sait aussi que les bénéfices du numérique sont soumis à l'acquisition de la lecture et de l'écriture. Donc, selon vous, dans des contextes nationaux foisonnants en langue locale, ces apprentissages doivent-ils être faits uniquement dans les langues officielles ?
Alors, Marie-Alix, là, vous posez une question plus large que mon domaine, qui est celui de l'enseignement supérieur, et où, généralement, il y a une langue officielle pour l'enseignement supérieur qui est régulée par les ministères locaux. Pardon. Mais je suis absolument en phase avec vous, puisque la question de la langue, ça pose la question de l'enseignement primaire et de l'accès à l'éducation, tout simplement. Donc, c'est une vaste question qui dépasse, j'ai envie de dire, la crise que nous connaissons aujourd'hui, mais qui définitivement est une question fondamentale pour l'accès à l'éducation. Et pour cela, je sais qu'il y a différentes solutions qui sont mises en place, notamment des startups extrêmement créatives. J'ai en tête, à l'esprit une startup qui me vient, qui a été développée par une femme d'ailleurs en Afrique du Sud, qui justement met des solutions online avec différents types de langues pour que tous les enfants, en fait, quelle que soit leur tribu, puissent avoir accès à des moyens de lecture pour apprendre à lire et qui ne soient pas déphasés entre la langue à la maison et la langue à l'école.
Merci Laura. Autre question, peut-être plus large, mais qui va être d'une actualité encore plus importante post-crise Covid, ça concerne l'employabilité. La logique, en fait, qui semblait implacable jusqu'à présent, selon laquelle une meilleure éducation offre de meilleurs emplois, donc de meilleurs salaires, et à l'échelle des pays, de meilleures rentrées fiscales, est aujourd'hui désuète. La scolarité massive ne se traduit pas ou plus par une inclusion économique. En témoigne le taux en fait de chômage des diplômés dans de nombreux pays. Quel modèle, adapté au contexte africain et répondant aux standards internationaux, permettrait une meilleure employabilité ?
Question cruciale. et avant de répondre à celle-ci, Marie-Alix, si vous me permettez, je voudrais soulever la solidarité qu'on a pu voir entre les pays et entre les différentes universités en Afrique. Et c'est important parce que je pense qu'on a là des clés pour les solutions quant au modèle et à l'employabilité. Ce qu'on a pu voir entre les différentes universités, entre les différentes écoles, les différentes équipes de recherche, on a pu voir une formidable éclosion de solutions, d'innovations qui ont été apportées pour essayer de lutter contre le Covid. J'ai en tête des exemples, notamment à travers les institutions du réseau Noris, par exemple en Tunisie. L'équipe des équipes de nos quatre institutions mêlant des docteurs de centres de simulation médicale, mêlant des ingénieurs, mêlant des partenaires académiques d'autres institutions, donc vraiment un effort collectif qui s'est immédiatement formé et qui ont pu délivrer un process pour un respirateur imprimé avec une imprimante 3D qui aujourd'hui, qui à partir du 4 mai va être en open source et va pouvoir être produit localement. Donc, pour qu'on trouve des solutions africaines, justement, à cette crise sanitaire. Donc, ce que je vois, c'est un formidable effort collectif. Et là, barrières publiques, privées, ingénieurs, médecins, des équipes pluridisciplinaires, différents types de partenaires de la société civile s'allient pour trouver une solution immédiate et c'est possible. Et ce qu'on voit, c'est des industriels aujourd'hui qui justement appellent ces structures universitaires pour pouvoir produire ces solutions qui sont par exemple le cas de ce respirateur, un respirateur à 400 € au lieu de 3 000 € en temps normal. Donc ce que je veux dire, c'est qu'on voit la capacité d'innovation de notre continent. On le voit à travers ce type d'initiative. On a vu ce type d'initiative dans plusieurs universités, plusieurs hubs d'innovation, de recherche à travers le continent. Qu'est-ce que ça nous dit? Ça nous dit que la capacité à trouver des solutions est en nous Africains. Nous pouvons trouver des solutions pour pouvoir arriver à contenir certains problèmes. Et quand je pense à l'éducation, et notamment à l'éducation supérieure, qui est notre obsession quotidienne au sein de Norwich United Universities, c'est que pour l'Afrique, je vois une solution, je vais parler en jargon un peu tech, mais une best of breed solution. Et là, pour moi, c'est prendre le meilleur des solutions technologiques, des solutions traditionnelles en termes d'éducation, les mettre ensemble pour construire un modèle africain qui soit accessible, durable et massifiable.
Merci Laura. Dans une tribune publiée cette semaine dans Jeune Afrique, Gilles Olakunle-Yabi, fondateur du think tank Wati, déclarait, je cite, que le meilleur usage de notre temps serait de structurer et de renforcer, nous aussi, tous nos lieux et institutions de production de savoir, d'idées, d'analyse, et de les mettre au service de la défense de l'intérêt des populations africaines d'aujourd'hui et de demain. Dans ce contexte, la privatisation de l'éducation par des fonds privés est-elle une réponse appropriée?
Toutes les solutions, qu'elles soient privées, publiques, de la société civile, for profit ou non-profit, pour augmenter l'accès à une éducation de qualité centrée sur l'employabilité sont les bienvenues. Ce serait ma réponse. Et pour faire simple, je pense que le message de Mandela sur l'éducation étant la meilleure arme pour changer le monde, je pense qu'il est plus que d'actualité. Parce que si aujourd'hui des solutions sont trouvées, c'est grâce à justement l'éducation et aux solutions qui peuvent être trouvées par différentes équipes de chercheurs, par différentes équipes de professionnels. Donc l'éducation mérite tous les moyens, quelle qu'en soit la source, à partir du moment où elle est accessible et où elle fait sens. C'est-à-dire que l'employabilité demain pour l'Afrique, nous avons besoin de data science, nous avons besoin d'ingénieurs, nous avons besoin d'agronomes, parce qu'après cette crise sanitaire, aura-t-on une crise alimentaire? Nous avons besoin de professionnels qui contribuent à structurer l'ensemble des pays, de nos pays. La green economy est quelque chose qui va définitivement se développer. Donc oui, si nous concentrons nos efforts sur une éducation utile, qui va pouvoir contribuer à avoir un impact sur nos communautés, sur nos pays.
Merci Laura. Une dernière question. C'est un peu la question phare, la question centrale de notre émission. What now? Dit autrement, si on quitte la route des panoramas, des hypothèses, des souhaits qu'on peut formuler, dans le domaine de l'éducation, que faire concrètement maintenant?
J'ai envie de répondre best of breed. C'est trouver des solutions qui sont réalisables pour assurer que les étudiants, les écoliers continuent à apprendre. Parce qu'on a beaucoup de vulnérabilité. Et en tant qu'éducateurs, nous devons utiliser toutes les solutions pour les accompagner à traverser cette crise dans les meilleures conditions possibles. C'est un rôle fondamental.
Merci beaucoup Laura, merci pour vos réponses, merci pour la franchise de vos réponses et merci vraiment d'avoir été avec nous. À bientôt.
Merci à vous tous.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you to Laura as well. Now I want to move the discussion onto the topic of money, more precisely debt forgiveness. Joining us today is Stephen Karingi. He is the Director of the Regional Integration, Infrastructure and Trade Division at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And he's joining us from Addis in Ethiopia, actually. Now, hello, Stephen, first of all.
Hi, Uzo. Nice to be on this program.
Thank you for joining us. Just so that our listeners and viewers are up to speed, a whole host of African leaders, including the African Union, appointed special envoys on COVID-19, have been calling for immediate debt relief for African countries to allow them to have access to financial resources to respond to the pandemic. And they've asked for approximately 100 billion US dollars in financial support. Now, what's happened since then, as I understand, is that the IMF has issued immediate debt relief to the value of around 210 million US dollars for 25 countries, 19 of them being on the continent. And the G20 has also announced debt relief for least developed countries, which include around 32 African countries and is valued at around 20 billion US dollars. So lots of sums of money running around. They're huge sums of money. So how come it's not enough? Why does the continent need 100 billion US dollars?
Oh, thank you very much, Uzo. First of all, it's important to go back to where we were before COVID-19 hit the globe. In terms of the African economy, there was a projection that we would grow by at least 3% in 2020 as a continent. Now, with the COVID-19 and the lockdowns and the shutdowns that are happening, that 3.2% is not going to be realized. In fact, our projection indicates that we might even have a contraction of up to 2.6% of the African economy. If you have to translate that to money, you are looking at more than $100 billion being not part of the economic output that we expected in the continent. That's the first point. The second point is, so in other words, the African leaders, or rather the African finance ministers, will not have the same level of economic growth to be able to derive domestic revenues, either through income taxes or corporate taxes or VAT, because of the contraction in the economy. The second point is that Africa was also not doing very well in terms of domestic resource mobilization. Unfortunately, as a continent, we are only able to collect at about 13 to 15% of our GDP as domestic revenue. This is not enough to be able to do all the things that the continent needs. Now, with COVID-19 and with this low rate of performance of the domestic resource mobilization, you need additional money so that at least you can deal with the health crisis that the COVID-19 has created, and at the same time, be able to create additional fiscal space so that you can be able to save the businesses, the private sector that are currently operating. Because if you do not do that, those businesses are going to collapse. So you need to be able to provide tax breaks to those businesses if they are also able to keep the workers to continue working. So by keeping these businesses going, you'll also be able to sustain the livelihoods of the people who work in this private sector. So this 100 billion is first of all to enable the continents to deal with the crisis, for which is a crisis that have affected everyone in the world, and then two, start helping in creating fiscal space because of the contraction of the economy, and also because of the trade channel. African economies are very much linked to the rest of the world. So the trade channel has almost shut down, which has led to most of the export revenues that these countries required to be able, even to service their debt, to actually dry up. You've seen the prices of oil in the case of countries like Nigeria, flowers that go to Europe from Ethiopia and Kenya, the textiles industry. So there is a lot of contraction in terms of the export revenues. And what this means is that the reserves are actually going down, the remittances are going down, yet these countries need to be able to sustain these economies running and also to be able to deal with the health crisis, both the economic and the health issues. So that's why these resources are required by the finance minister.
Yeah, so a huge job in terms of servicing and tackling the health crisis, but also the socio-economic consequences of what we're seeing globally. So that is very clear and understandable. Let me be the devil's advocate here and ask you, what do you say to those who might argue that Africa should stop borrowing money, or at least at the rates that they're borrowing at, if they are unable to pay it back? This is a discussion that we've seen, in the media. What would you say?
No, first of all, we need to also go back to where Africa has come from in the last 10 to 20 years. Africa has put its macroeconomic management house in order. In fact, since the HIPC initiative, and even for the non-HIPC countries, we have seen an improvement in the macroeconomic management within the continent. So,
and those are high indebted countries that you're talking about, right?
Yes. So what has been happening is that Africa has actually, both the highly indented and even those that do not have high debt, everybody in Africa has been working very hard together with the citizens to ensure that there is better economic management. And what this means that this pandemic did not meet us at a point whereby we were not doing something. In fact, even at this point, the African countries, the African finance ministers have actually had to reorient their budgets to mobilize their own resources. The African Union has set up a COVID fund. African countries are contributing to the Africa CDC. So there's a lot that Africa is trying to do as much as possible for itself. However, because of the weak private sector, we are not able as a continent to mobilize sufficient domestic resources. And that is why we have been operating at 13 to 15%. And for you to be able to deal with the Sustainable Development Goals needs, then you need to bridge that gap. Part of that gap you do by having exports, do by attracting foreign direct investments, do by getting resources from your export earning, but at the same time borrowing domestically and also borrowing from the foreign markets. Now, even in the foreign markets, we know that the credit rating agencies had rated most African economies in such a way that these African economies were able to go to the market. So what I'm trying to say in short is that you still need debt to be able to finance your development as one avenue through which you address the Sustainable Development Goals. So I would not agree with people who say that you do not need debt. However, we need to look at the structure and the type of debt that we incur. So as it is now, the debt that is dollar denominated, African countries are having difficulties to service it because their currencies are falling because of lack of export earning, reserves are dwindling. So we might have to start as a continent to think, how do we issue debt to finance our development using our own local currencies? And if we have to go to the foreign markets or even to go to the to contract debt from outside the continent, we have to make sure that we contract debt that we can be able to understand the contract terms, and one that does not put us in a situation whereby we are unable to service from a simple shock, from any shock, whether a shock like a pandemic like this or any other particular shock. So really, you still need to get additional resources if we are to eradicate poverty, if we are to get every child to school, and if we are able to get our private sector going.
Stephen, we seem to have lost your visual.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, you're
Thank
back.
you. Sorry about that.
No, perfect. That's a really helpful explanation of a very complex issue. And I think we could also talk for probably years about the intricacies of debt management for some of the African countries. As you know, our show is really focused on how we go from the theoretical debate towards concrete action. So with that in mind, I want you to take into consideration the following. Number one, the current proposals from the G20 and IMF not being sufficient. Number two, private creditors that are not currently part of the equation. Number three, yes, I'm going to say it, China, who have not played a leadership role in this, despite 20% of all African government debt being owed to them. So it could make quite a big difference. I want to ask you, what now? What is the African leadership going to do next? It doesn't have 100 billion USD from these agreements. What will happen?
First of all, in terms of the sufficiency of the money, when you started the program, this section of the program, you indicated that most of the money that has been mobilized through the G20 and through the IMF is for the least developed countries. However, LDCs form only 25% of the African economy. Now, what that means, if you do not provide support to the non-LDCs in the continent, and you're trying to address a global economic slowdown as we are witnessing now, then you're actually leaving a significant part of the solution to the global economy unattended to. So that is why we are arguing that these resources are not sufficient, because you need to remember that most of the trade between the developed countries and other emerging developing economies are actually with these middle income countries within the continent, or the developing economies within the continent, like South Africa, like Nigeria, like Kenya, like Cote d'Ivoire. So, and yet these countries are also involved in the supply chains, private sector supply chains with the rest of the world. So if you have Ethiopian Airlines unable to operate because of, or let me talk about South African Airways or Kenya Airways, because those are the non-LDCs. If you have those airlines not able to operate because there is no support to these non-LDC African economies, or Air Morocco for that matter, then you're not solving the problem. Coming to the question of so why now? What now? We need to have an all-Africa response when it comes to this issue, this debt issue, because this debt issue, it was not for the making of these African countries. It's a pandemic that has come, and I think that is how it should be. It should be seen. And if you're to save the African private sector, you also need to remember that you're doing it for the well-being of the global economy. Coming to the question of the private creditors at the same time, I think to go back to what I said earlier, Africa has worked hard to win the confidence of the markets. And that's why African countries are able to go to the markets and get commercial debt. And I think some of them even did that as late as last year, or at the beginning of this year, and they were able to get that in good terms. However, because of this pandemic, now Africa is being punished. We see the yields for the commercial debt for African countries going up, which means it's being punished for something that is not for their own making. And that is why we are saying the private creditors also need to come to the table, because it is not because of mismanagement that these countries are saying we need breathing space through the debt standstill or the establishment of a special purpose vehicle that will allow us to be able not to default on your debt, but at least to get time to deal with this crisis, and then we can see how we can restructure it. So this is the argument where you need the commercial creditors on the table. And then when it comes to the question of, and you have to remember that a significant proportion of the debt of the continent is actually, a big portion of it is commercial. So if you have these economies being unable to sustain their private sector, it means that it's going to be difficult even for them to be able to service the debt. So we need order in terms of the way we deal with the commercial debt and the debt standstill, and also the special purpose vehicle through which the commercial creditors are being asked to come on board. We'll actually buy time, deal with the crisis, and then see how we move forward. And then, of course, when it comes to the question of China, China is a big partner of the continent, and I don't think you can be able to have a solution on this debt issue without having everybody on the table. Now, the good thing is that China is part of the G20, so it's part of this conversation, and I believe the conversations continue. And I think at the end of the day, we will see how we move forward. But I think China has not said that it does not want to be part of the solution. It wants to deal on a case-by-case basis, but that may not be necessarily be what would provide a solution in a situation like the one in which we are in, whereby we need to work together, global solidarity that is pulled together to be able to resolve the issue of the debt for the continent.
Okay, so we're hearing global solidarity, looking at private creditors. So there is a what now. Stephen, thank you so much for joining the show. We are at the end of the show already. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I'm sure it will carry on well into the coming weeks. Thank you for joining us on Reviewing Africa.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Bye.
Bye. So this week we have a few more minutes. Well, officially we don't have any minutes left, but we're still going to try and entertain you. This week, the lighter piece of content that we want to share is a variation of the hashtag How God Made Me Challenge, which is basically a challenge where people add ingredients to a bowl that represent their own qualities. But the version we are showing you is the recipe for how God made African parents. So sorry to aunties, uncles, mums, dads ahead of time, but this is unbelievably accurate and quite funny. So bear with me one moment while I share my screen and let you take a look. So there you have it. Marie, what do you think? I know this was one of your favorites and you are a parent, so maybe this is a bit too personal for you.
You know what? It's really accurate. It's really accurate. But I want to highlight that as parents, we're just doing our best. And with the homeschooling now, what I want to share with other parents is I see you and I feel you.
So you put yourself definitely in that category then?
Oh, you know, we should ask to Actually, I think I'm not the one who can really answer to that question, but I'm doing my best too.
Well, I think it's unbelievably accurate and absolutely hilarious. I think the only thing that they missed out is the constantly asking where your husband is to prompt you to get married. I think that could have been added and then we would have been perfect. Very on point. Well, that's a wrap then.
Yes, et ce sera donc tout pour cette semaine. Merci à nos deux experts de nous avoir rejoints et merci à vous d'avoir été des nôtres pour ce deuxième épisode de Reviewing Africa from What If to What Now. Rendez-vous la semaine prochaine, même jour, même heure.
Yes, a huge thanks for joining us once again, and to our experts, Laura and Stephen, who came on this week. We will be back next week, Thursday, from 5 o'clock Central European time for more Reviewing Africa. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to listen and view the shows and review the shows. And until then, keep safe and keep healthy. Thank you so much for watching.